Hello and welcome to a brief introduction of Chapter 1, which is the organization of the human body. I'm going to be working off of the PowerPoint. This PowerPoint is available on Blackboard under PowerPoints, and I'm only going to be highlighting the important parts of it. Please take time to read more detail in the textbook if you wish to know more about it. Okay? When you look at the chapter, near the end of the first chapter is this diagram. This diagram is a very good way to get you organized in the studying of this chapter. It is basically the organization of the human body. And what we're going to focus on is basically the body studies that we have and the directions in terms of anatomical positions and planes for dissection or sectioning. We're going to briefly get into body cavities and briefly look at some activities in the body. In the textbook too, there's also an outline of terms. These are very good to know and a good way to have your vocabulary increased. Okay, as we go through, you will also see the learning outcomes. These learning outcomes are similar to the ones in your unit plan of your learning objectives. Also a good way to pay attention to help you study and know what you're going at. Now, when you look at it, there are a couple of ologies, and ology means study. We have anatomy, which is about the structure, and you have physiology, which is about the study of function. Anything to do with pathology? Pathology has to do with disease. When you look at the body itself, it starts from chemicals. Chemicals are an arrangement of molecules, and then these chemicals come together and they form cells. A group of cells working together will result in a tissue. A group of tissues working together, result in an organ, and groups of organs working together result in a system, and groups of system results in an organism. So an example, when it comes to molecules, you have proteins and fats, or lipids, and carbohydrates all working together to form a cell. An example of that is on the cell membrane, you have phospholipids working together. Then that will form, let's say, a cell in the digestive tract. These cells will then come together, and different cells, the epithelial lining of the cells, will form tissues. You also have muscle cells, which will form muscle tissues in the digestive system. Then when they come together, you have groups of tissues working together. An example of this is the stomach. The stomach has a lining of epithelial tissue, then you have layers of muscle tissue, and you have connective tissue working together. So all these groups of tissue working together produces an organ. Then the organs together in the digestive system, you have the stomach, you have the intestines, they work together to form the digestive system. The digestive system then will work together with the other 11 systems. So you've got the integument, the muscular, the endocrine system. They all work together to keep the organism working well. Okay, so here are our systems, our level of organizations. This is a fabulous multiple choice question where I basically tell you to put these in order in order of complexity. Such as, here is an example of a possible quiz. Okay. Some other things. Metabolism is the all the chemical reactions that occur in the body. You can have catabolism, which is the breaking down of the reactions, and you have anabolism, and anabolism builds up. Now, catabolism, just I imagine like a cat tractor going and bulldozing things and it breaking it down. Catabolism uses ATP, which is the body's form of energy. An example here is the word popcorn is a large word. If you break it down, you get pop and corn, and if you put them together, you get popcorn. And these are examples of what happens in the body. Very good here. Catabolism means breaking down. So if you have a carbohydrate and you break it down, you will get glucose. If you have glucose and you go through the process of anabolism or building, you can have a starch molecule or glycogen, which is then stored in the liver. Okay? Homeostasis is a term that's thrown out quite a bit in the body. Homeostasis is the ability for the body to maintain an internal balance. Now, it maintains an internal balance, but it's usually as a result of many processes usually going against each other. An example is if you're cold, you will shiver. If you're too hot, you will sweat. It's described in the textbook as a furnace. If it's too hot in your room, you will turn on the air conditioning, and then if it gets too too cold, you turn on the thermostat. The body works this way, and what you have is changes all the time, but they work together for a set point, and that's how it works in the body. You have the body consistently changing, taking in food, breaking down food, building up molecules, but you want to keep it consistent at all times. Okay, when it comes to introduction to the body, you have directions, and the directional terms, they're paired. Superior means above, anterior means below. When you look at the heart, you have a vein that goes into the body above. That's the superior vena cava. The one that comes from the bottom of the body is the inferior vena cava. Anterior is towards the head, posterior towards the back. Then when you talk about medial and lateral, medial is towards the middle, lateral is towards the outside. This is very important. I suggest you memorize these parts. Then when it comes to dissecting the body, quite often we cut the body to look inside. Now we may actually cut it on a test like a CAT scan, or we actually may do a cross section to look at something. There is a frontal plane which separates front from back, sagittal separates left from right, and transverse, also called a cross section, will separate the top from the bottom. And this is important when you look at different images, CT images or MRI images. There'll be cross-sectional, longitudinal, and oblique. And I'll introduce some of those later when we look at some different images. When you're looking at tissue sections, cross-section goes across the middle. You usually see the layers. Longitudinal is long, and oblique is usually interesting but doesn't have a lot of purpose. Another thing that is very important is the body cavities. It's important to realize the diaphragm. The diaphragm is the main muscle at the bottom of the ribs, which separates the thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity, and that's the main one. You also have a cavity around the brain and spinal cord, which is where the cerebral spinal fluid goes. We'll look at more detail at these as we get to different parts and different organ systems. Another thing to look at is all this naming. Just be aware of it. You don't have to memorize this one. It pretty much makes sense. One thing that is very important in understanding directions on the body are terms or adjectives that go with the body. Cranial is a brain word. Ocular, the ocular motor nerves are the eye nerves. You have oral, such as oral health, has to do with your mouth. These need to be memorized, and including the spelling. So when you look at antebrachial, that's the beginning of your the indentation. Most of these you're familiar with because you've heard terms related to them. Some you might not be aware of. Is crural, which is the leg. Then you have patellar, which is the kneecap. Palmar is the palm. Now this is what's called anatomical position, where you have the palms up. Axillary is the armpit. Antecubital is the inner elbow. And quite often, once you look at injections, you have injections in your antecubital fossa, which is the the area at the front of your elbow. Inguinal is the groin. Notice it goes more towards into the groin. This looks a little high. And those ones pretty much make sense. Please memorize all of these, or even better, associate them with words you know. Then there is also the posterior of the body. Acromion is the top of the shoulder. You have the acromion process, which is important in marking the body. Scapula is the shoulder blade. Iliac has to do with the part of the hips. You have the iliac, the ischium, and the pubis, which are the hip bones, and they work to those. Popliteal, which is the back of the knee, and sural, you may not have heard of before. Okay. That's a quick introduction of chapter 1. One thing I want you to pay close attention to is the word anatomy. By learning these parts, you can build larger words. Take time to go through the rest of the quizzes and practice it. But that's pretty much the intro for chapter 1.